webinar. I'm Dr. Bonnie Stabile, Associate Professor and Associate Dean for Student and Academic Affairs at the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University. I'm so glad to have you with us today. The topics under discussion today, the future of digitalization, automation, and work, are timely and raise some important policy implications for us to consider. And we like to think the Schar School is uniquely well positioned to address these types of policy implications, as our faculty has a wide range of expertise and experience in unpacking complex intersecting issues in an evolving policy context. So I hope that you'll enjoy diving into this topic with us today, and that you come back periodically to explore an array of issues across policy areas. Please check out our Schar School events page, and I'll look forward to seeing you again virtually or in person for one of our many events, and hopefully several. And now I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. David Rare, a Schar professor and director of our Center for Business and Civic Engagement. David's also co-founder of the Robotic Process Automation Initiative, amplifying the use of technology to help government at all levels be more effective and efficient. So David, I'll pass on to you.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. I am delighted to introduce Ian Barkin, entrepreneur, investor, speaker, author, who focuses on the future of work and its implications for the workers of the future. He co-founded the leading RPA consultancy, Symphony Ventures, which he sold to Sykes Enterprises in 2018. He then served in the C-suite of the company, which is valued at about $1.7 billion. Ian has authored LinkedIn learning courses used by people across the globe to learn about and to apply RPA, AI, and cognitive technologies. He authored the book, Intelligent Automation, Welcome to the World of Hyperautomation, and was the host of the podcast, One Take, where he explored customer experience and digital transformation trends. Ian is now dreaming up his new adventures and is exploring new ways to tell stories through his vlog found on YouTube and LinkedIn, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Ian, we appreciate you being with us today at George Mason.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also joining us on the webinar is my dear friend and colleague, Dornan, who I co-authored a paper with, The Promise of RPA for the Public Sector, which has really now gone global. And we appreciate everyone reading it and following its advice. And we're looking for ways to amplify the use of RPA in the public sector. So let's begin with today's webinar. Ian, what was the first experience or instance that took you down the path of technology, RPA, ML, and AI?
Sure. So this goes back to industries and roles that I played prior to even knowing anything about RPA, knowing how to spell it. And it was that I'd spent a lot of time in my career as a consultant and in outsourcing. And I enjoyed consulting, but I loved outsourcing. And outsourcing was an opportunity both to travel a whole lot, meet a lot of really interesting people and cultures and countries all over the planet, but for the purpose of tapping into talent wherever it was. And at the time, obviously, it was an arbitrage game too. It was tapping into talent in lower cost locations so as to emulate the work that enterprises needed done that they often were doing in captive centers domestically. And so that was a role I played, helping to design solutions, set up those teams, and manage those teams, always with an eye towards innovation, towards transformation. And before we started using the word digital transformation, we were just looking at sort of transformation thanks to knowing more, having better data, having better insight, doing better analytics on the way processes were handled. And so it was in that sort of scope of work that I happened to bump into what was yet to be called RPA, but quickly caught the attention of not just me, but frankly, the whole outsourcing industry, because it just was such an easy extension to make, an easy comparable to the work we were already doing. And sort of the rest is history, I suppose, but it was very exciting to have to wrap our heads around, so what are you saying these tools can do? And then how do we calculate how much they can do versus how much they're comparable, the teams of people can do currently, and how do we train this software, and then ultimately how do we put it into effect, and how do we manage it, and what is the role of people in this new story. So this was about 2012, and like I said, we'll touch on a lot of topics, and they are all history, and it was an exciting place to be, and just a lot of luck on my part to be in the right place at the right time.
Right. I think that's excellent. Then you went on, let's jump forward. You went on to build a successful company in robotic process automation space, really one of the first ones, kind of at the cutting edge. What was your vision for the enterprise, and how did you educate and communicate the benefits of a relatively new technology to demonstrate value to the customers? Because I know that's something we still face in the public sector. We know what it's going to cost. Tell us what return we're going to get by using it.
Well, and you're not alone in that struggle. So the original vision of the company, and so we named it Symphony Ventures for a specific reason. Our tagline was orchestrating the world's work. So symphony, orchestra. We thought that was creative. And orchestrating the world's work spoke to lots of different forms of output, of effort. And so it was not just using robots, software, algorithms, and scripts to emulate work that people were doing. It also incorporated, very much so, the people. So in our vision of orchestrating the world's work, we also incorporated the people that you have in your own organizations. We took into consideration the outsourcing, so those third-party teams. We also took into consideration things like the gig economy of crowdsourced talent that was able to do sort of discrete tasks and be coordinated to make the whole process more efficient. And there was another area we were really passionate about, which is a concept called impact sourcing, which is the act of giving work to those whom the livelihood that the work creates, the salary creates, has a greater impact. So these are people in sort of harder hit areas domestically, in inner cities perhaps, or third world countries where they don't necessarily have the same access to economic opportunity. Anyway, so that was the original vision, was to orchestrate all of that together. But like all startups and all industry trends, the prevailing winds were so strong in the direction of how do we use robotic process automation, and then, as you allude to, and then how do we incorporate higher and higher orders of technology complexity and capability, like machine learning and other sort of AI, what we refer to as intelligent automation capabilities.
Ian, please allow me to take over, keep it on the same line, and take my role of co-conductor here in an orchestra or symphony. And I'm curious that over your time with your enterprise and at Symphony Ventures, how have you seen RPA evolve and grow in use or in popularity, as well as AI, ML, and the movement towards digitalization?
Right. So I've been fascinated by the speed of uptake. I think it was one of those, it had a few things going for it. Some of the names helped. So robot in any name makes it at least something that people want to write about and come up with pictures for. So that visualized a trend. But it spoke to just this, I mean, obviously this sort of implicit, sort of ever-present need and friction in enterprises to do things better. And so this really was that catalyst to encourage people to think about how can they do things better, and especially how can they remove the more painful, mundane tasks from their lives? How can they be the most human that they can be? And these tools are the ones that were going to help them get there. And so really from that sort of early 2010s, 11, 12, 13 period to now, where you watched certain names just sort of take the stage and really capture everyone's attention. RPA was the first one, really. The speed at which people's job titles on LinkedIn and just the recruiting job descriptions started to incorporate that language was mind-blowing to me. And then even more mind-blowing was the speed at which intelligent automation then sort of took it over and spoke to a broader scope of capabilities. So I've never seen a trend in my career take off so fast, but the struggle is very real, as David had referred to. Education is paramount, and there's not enough of it out there. And there's still a lot of confusion as to what we're even talking about, and what the capabilities are, and what the responsibilities are of any enterprise looking to understand, apply, deploy, manage, and nurture this sort of capability set in their companies.
Yeah, I actually first met you when I opened up the book you co-authored, Intelligent Automation, Welcome to the World of Hyperautomation, which I believe just celebrated its 1-year anniversary. And I'd like to tack a little bit here and talk about the book and some of the reasons why you wrote the book and some of the kind of takeaways of the book for people who are, particularly people who are non-technical oriented. So how did you get the idea of co-authoring the book, and what would you define intelligent automation to be for a non-tech person?
There's a lot of question there, and thank you so much for referring to it. And you're right; it just hit the 1-year milestone last week, and we're proud of that. It was an interesting collaboration, frankly. It was co-written by 3 individuals. Really, it was the inspiration and idea of one of them, Pascal Bornet, the primary author, and he'd spent a lot of time in Asia primarily. He's French, but he lived in Singapore. And so spent a lot of time in those markets helping enterprises understand this stuff. Was a clearly recognized expert in the field of interpreting, understanding, deploying these types of technologies. He partnered up with a business school professor of his, Johan Wirtz, is a professor whose specialty is in services marketing out of the National University of Singapore. And I knew Pascal just because we were in the same circles. We were both putting content out, him a lot more than me, and we got along, and we had this brainstorm, and he took it and ran with it. And the result is the book, but it really is a compilation of not just our experiences, but of a ton of influencers and friends and shepherds who sort of helped us along the way and shared their perspectives and their points of view and their opinions, so that it wasn't just our 3 points of view on the space. So that was it. It was a huge amount of effort, and just get up and go from Pascal, and then Johan and I helped and contributed and lent our editing skills and some of the structure. And then to your point of what is intelligent automation, like so many others have before us, we looked at ourselves as the place to start with a framework. Right? It's so much easier to understand capabilities when you relate them to your own human abilities. And so we break it down really into 4 categories of things that we can do. So of the sort of the simplest are, there's execution, there's the finger work. And a lot of that was in the RPA space. It was just transactional, mechanical, rote repetition of routine tasks that were easily defined. So intelligent automation handles repetition through execution. There's listening and interpreting and hearing. There is speaking and understanding and communicating. So there's things like character recognition. Computers can see and make sense of characters on a screen or in a scan of a document. Computers can now understand what you say, right? Many of us have devices in our houses that we ask questions of all day long. That technology allows it to hear, interpret, then do something with, and then feedback. And then the final quadrant of the 4 is thinking and learning. And I think this is where it gets really sort of complex, but also confusing and hard to define and apply in enterprises. And that's really where a lot of the machine learning and AI comes in, which is what are the capabilities to both absorb all the data that's made available through the other capabilities, and then pattern recognize, and then do something with it, not just to say, this is happening a lot, but this is happening a lot, and might I suggest we do this next, or even just, I'm going to do this next. And so those sorts of higher order sort of AI cognitive capabilities, you see in discrete pockets, you don't see more widely used right now. And partly I think that's a good thing because it's hard for companies to understand. And partly it's just because it's hard to do that well. So you don't see it as much in execution right now.
And what one or two things would you like the readers to walk away with after they finish the book?
So
I know it's the pace of change is quickly,
right.
but like beyond just speed.
Right. It's interesting. There's probably, I'm going to up it. You asked for one or two. I'm going to give you three. How about that?
Okay.
I exceed expectations, David. That's my consultant in me.
Right.
One of them is a filter, is giving her a lens, I suppose, giving people the ability to look at the environment in which they operate, in which they work, and see potential opportunity, to understand the tools that are available to us, to then look through that lens and see what could be impacted or what could be transformed. Not necessarily know exactly yet, but at least know that that's a place worth looking. It's a place to spend time in education and discussion. The second one is an enthusiasm around this stuff. It's an appreciation that it really is, as you say, it's changing rather quickly. Its impacts are quite exciting, and it requires that we spend a lot of time both committing ourselves in our own learning journey, but we also have to communicate it to our organizations and get other people on board. So that only comes if you are enthusiastic about it and you believe that it's a venture that's worthwhile to go on. And then the third really is optimism. And we spend a good chunk of the sort of the latter third of the book looking at the potential positive outcomes and impacts of a wide-scale adoption of automation in enterprises and in public sector as well. So what we don't give credence to and what we don't believe is a viable narrative is the whole robots are coming for our jobs, we're all doomed, they can do everything that we can do sort of narrative. We've never seen it play out before. We just don't think it will. What we do think is by unleashing resources, by doing things more efficiently, we can apply those resources to things like better education and education reform, better global stewardship, better healthcare, better focus on sort of government resources and government services. And so that should leave us optimistic, but it's incumbent on us to do the right thing with the resources that we're able to free up. So those are my three.
Ian, I also want to confirm and congratulate you for the book. And from a personal experience, I have to say that it's a very easy to read book and very well written. Very, it just flows very well. So thanks for making that available, to the community and for the public and having the idea. Now, let me ask you this: how has your views been altered, if they have been, since the book was published, as the digitization continues to evolve worldwide?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I'm thrilled and honored and just energized by the global response, not necessarily to the book itself, but to the topic. Right? There's so much positive, enthusiastic energy around the discussion and the topic of how we might have the ability to transform and change the environments, the tasks that we slog through every day. So that's exciting. I really do like that. But pragmatism is key too, in so much as I speak to all of my peers and friends in the space that I had the privilege of working with over the last few years, and always check back with clients that we've had. There's this really cool sort of Symphony Ventures diaspora of folks who've moved on from Symphony, who've gone to other services firms and some to technology firms, which, man, I marvel at, and I'm so proud of, and it also gives me a chance to sort of tap into lots of different points of view. And enterprises are struggling to scale with this stuff. So while there is an appreciation of the potential impact, there's still a lot of pent up potential for a lot of reasons. And it doesn't matter what industry or what sector, public, private, you name it. There's a lot of work left to be done, because this isn't just an out of the box easy equation or journey to be on, frankly.
Yeah. Now you also produce, I mean, I'm sure you're extremely busy by your resume and what you do, but you also produce and teach one of the most popular RPA classes on LinkedIn. And as an educator, what has been your experiences with the people taking your class, and what trends and real impact do you see occurring? And do I have to fear for my job that everybody's going to go on to LinkedIn for education? I'm just kidding about that last part.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I do think education is becoming more and more democratized.
Right.
But you know that. I mean, you've tapped into that with the book that you wrote, with webinars that you do to share your knowledge with your community. So technology is amazing as an enabler and a democratizer of access to information. In regards to the LinkedIn learning courses, I love those things, David. It's so much fun to be a teacher. And this is like the difference between live theater and television, in so much as I don't get to be in front of a classroom when I was doing these courses, and I mean, they're years old now. I mean, one of them is almost 2.5 years old, I think, 3 years. But what I do get to see is a global student body that's coming to and taking my courses and a raft of other courses, many of which have been pulled together into curricula by LinkedIn Learning, actually, to help people to learn more about what digital transformation is, and to give them all of the foundational skills that that folks have thought were important to gain. But what I've been most excited about is again, back to that democratization concept. I mean, there isn't a country or a role or a level within a company that people haven't come from. I mean, it truly is exciting that their students taking my class from all over Africa, from across Asia, throughout Europe, and in the US and Latin America. And so it's fun to see that. It's fun to see where they go on to next, as far as what the next courses they take, some more on sort of management skills, others on the technical track. And it's interesting to engage with them. I reach out to anyone that I know who's taken the course and ask them to, I don't know if they know it. I don't know if they think I'm being serious or not, but I do genuinely ask them to stay in touch and let me know about their success stories and where they go and how they apply those skills. And I do hope that over the weeks, months, years, I hear back from them and hear about how they were able to develop their own careers and benefit themselves and their companies, but themselves and their communities with the skills that they're able to learn online.
And I can confirm that, Ian. I know there's no such a bot/troll yet that exists on LinkedIn. So you're actually personalizing everything to each student of yours and engaging with them. So that's real great. I think there's tremendous value there as well. Now, before we move to the next question, I would just kindly invite the audience to keep in mind if they have any questions, to write it in the chat room, and then at the end we'll answer them, of course. So let's move forward, and then Ian, let's move to the digitalization, which you just touched upon earlier, and its progress and practical impact on the future of work. My question is, where do you see global digitalization going in the future? Simple question.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's easy. Where do I think it's going? Well, first and foremost, again, back to that sort of that lens filter concept. I think whether or not organizations adopt wholesale digital transformation initiatives or not, the sheer existence of this set of capabilities is making everyone think differently about what they do and how they do it. And so hopefully that's just a good thing. Hopefully sort of universally that moves us all towards a better place of more resilience in our organizations and ultimately more focus on the components that matter, which is not the machinations of processes inside the company, but the purpose for all of those processes. And the purposes are usually to benefit citizens or customers or patients or you name it, through just better process, better design, better knowledge of who I am, better anticipation of what I might be needing, better proactivity as far as solving issues that I face. So I sincerely hope that organizations use this technology for that, for purpose and for benefit and good, not just to reduce operating costs and aspire to cut down team size, et cetera, because that's a missed opportunity. But I do think there's a clock speed dissonance. And the clock speed dissonance is, and I was a marketer, right? I was a chief marketing officer in my last role. It was a hell of a lot easier for me to dream up cool, funky names for innovation than it was for the engineers to actually develop, design, and build the innovation. And harder yet for the governments and enterprises to become aware of, educate themselves on, and deploy that innovation. And so I think we just need to be pragmatic about how there's a lot of excitement, especially from sort of the din of marketing and messaging. And there's still a lot of hard work and, and pragmatic, real education and change management and transformation that needs to go on. So the future of work, Doran, to your point, is the aspiration that technology is pretty damn capable, but the understanding that execution and good approach is the only way we're going to get there. And I think that takes just a maturity that hopefully a lot of us are instilling in anybody who wants to be involved in this space, to understand what is hard and where they should really spend their time focusing on to lay those solid foundations.
Yeah. Digitalization, in my mind, doesn't mean there's not going to be work. There's going to be work, and it's going to be hard work. But when you execute it, the benefits will be so much better for so many more people. And I think the quality of life for everyone will improve. So about 10 years ago, as I think I mentioned, I was involved in the first and the only analog to digital TV transition in the US. And the reason why I like Ian is because when we met on LinkedIn, I was talking about his book, and then he flipped up my book, which I wrote on the process. And he said, I've never met anybody who read my book before. I don't know, maybe it's not a big seller, maybe it's boring, but I was like, wow, this is a shocker. But anyway, so I oversaw this effort. It was really at the beginning of digitalization. We spent like $1.6 billion on the whole campaign. It was extremely successful. I would argue it was one of the most successful campaigns in American public-private sector partnerships in the history of the country. We had like 30 million households and 60 million TVs that we had to convert. And we learned some lessons, and we could talk about those in a moment, but I'm sure we've also learned other lessons since then. One of the lessons I learned was you have to really think big.
Yes.
Because people don't understand it. Even now, with 10 years later and talking about digitalization, people, all these tech people who I really like and admire a lot, have all these kind of nice names for things, but I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? I'm not a tech guy. I studied economics, barely got through modeling, but what do you think some of the lessons are that we've learned over the last decade or so with this forward progress of digitalization?
Well, I think lesson one is, if you want a professor to like you, buy his book. So that
that's a good right? lesson.
So I bring props. No, I mean, it's, as you say, I think the challenge is complexity doesn't win you any prizes when the when the game is change management and wide, like large scale transformation, right? So if you want to geek out and talk about the complexity, you're going to lose most people. And in fact, you're going to annoy most people, and then you're done. Then there's no way to move them in a direction that you'd like them to move in, which hopefully is a direction that best serves them. Right. So in that shift from analog to digital, yeah, I mean, the higher capabilities and better ability to serve the viewing market, that was going to better serve them. And you had a huge marketing budget, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it was, it was a government initiative, right? So you don't do anything small. But you're absolutely right that you need to think big, but you need to plan in really specific, discrete sort of evolutionary steps. Just because we talked about this from the beginning. We saw this back in 2012, is that the only way you were going to make any of these changes happen is to manage that change. And all too often, change management was just completely forgotten about, overlooked entirely. And all of the sub components of that, of stakeholder management, understanding who all the players are and where their heads are at this moment. I mean, are they detractors or supporters? If they're detractors, is it a good reason? Did they get burned from the last shift from a technology to analog? And who's still pissed off about analog, right? I mean, how do you win them over? So yeah, there's a lot we learned, and that's, I think, still some of the reason why transformation hasn't lived up to the sort of the picture that's been painted of its potential, just because we continue to forget how to do education, stakeholder management, and change management.
Yeah. One of the other lessons that I learned was that we had to be aggressively innovative. There's so much information clutter out there. It's probably even harder these days because, I mean, the benefit of digitalization is we have more opportunities to hear things, to see things, but there's so much more going on. We could spend a half hour on YouTube and just kind of get down the rabbit hole and not get out. Oh, there's another cat video, or there's something that's interesting, and you lose kind of the big picture. I don't know how we solve that, but it requires an immense focus too, to stay engaged with people. So when you're explaining the transformation to them, they're not thinking it's the government telling them what they have to do with their TV sets. I mean, right. I remember the whole time I used to wake up every day and literally say to myself in the mirror, it will make your television brighter and it will make your audio clearer. Because those were the two selling points. As a marketing guy, you could probably appreciate that. And when people heard that, they went, yeah, I want my picture cleaner and I want the audio better. But I was kind of getting tired of that for 18 months, just saying the same thing. But only at the end did it seem to pierce through to people, and it was suddenly making sense.
So two things. One, I think you've innovated here, and we should discuss intelligent automation adoption via cat videos. Perhaps that's the way we really go viral on this. I'm going to think long and hard about this after we're done here, and I'll come back with some storyboard sketches. But the other is, and it's funny you say this, it's just, you're in stump speech category, or in territory, right? You just have to realize there are actually a lot of people. And so, and all of the people need to hear what you have to say multiple times. So you may feel like you're just stuck as a broken record, but that's when you've gotten it. That's probably when you've got it right, when you've settled on a message that is legitimately the right one, that does work. You just have to keep getting out there and working it and transmitting it, to use a television reference, because that's what's happening in enterprises too. Again, there's fear and uncertainty. There's certainly doubt. There's imperfect information. There's fear mongering, and also there's this insane complexity of vocabulary and terminology that even the people who are in the know can barely have discussions with each other because they barely know what each other is saying. And so I think that's going to be a pretty large constraint to rapid adoption ever, and something that we just need to address with the knowledge that we've gained from prior transformations.
Right. To your point, one of the challenges for me personally was I was in charge of leading this campaign. It was pretty obvious to me that I'd be fired if it didn't work. But then people that I worked for were always kind of wringing their hands and nervous about the unknown. And, I don't know if I was pretending to be a Marine or something, but I was like, I'd point up and go, we're going to take the hill. We're going to take the hill. And they're like, well, we can't take the hill. We're all going to die. I'm like, we're taking the hill. I mean, we're figuratively, we're going to die.
Yeah.
But it's hard for people culturally when they're kind of in a bedrock to make the change that's necessary to embrace the future, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah. We're all going to die. You're a natural cheerleader, sir.
Well, I'll just tell you one more quick story. I actually gave a speech once where I talked about Washington at the battle when they went across the river into Delaware. And he's writing something on a piece of paper, and he leaves, and they go in, and the doctor sees it, and somebody says, "What did he write?" And he says, "If we are not successful, let no one come back alive." And I said that to like 2,000 people in the room, and you could hear a pin drop, and then I had to say, I'm just kind of kidding on that part.
I'm just kidding.
I
see. Yeah, burn the boats is never a good icebreaker.
Right, that's right. That's right. But they never. I had one guy like 2 years later come up to me and go, "Let no one come back alive, David, if we're not successful." So I burnt it into their minds, and we were successful as we were at the DTV transition. But we're learning a lot of things, getting the big picture, staying focused, being aggressive. Giving that some stump speech all the time, 24 hours a day, and then trying to be aggressively innovative to educate people whose attention is drawn in thousands of different directions.
Right. And they have their day jobs. I mean, actually,
right.
I don't know am I allowed to go to some of the questions in the comment section? Because there's some good ones that actually.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's start with questions.
Sure.
If you haven't put a question in and you want to, please type it in and let's go to questions.
Yeah. So I'm going to pick up on Jim Walker's question. And Jim, thank you for the questions and for the promotion on LinkedIn earlier today and yesterday. So he was talking about if scaling so hard, why am I led to that conclusion, and what's the solution to make it easier? The reason I'm led to that conclusion is just because in my experience in working with some of the earlier adopters of RPA specifically, there was a pilot mentality where enterprises were piloting a lot in very discrete places, but it all fell apart when it came to scaling, to actually applying it to larger scopes of work or cross-domain, where automation in an upstream process was then influencing and helping automate a downstream process. So like HR, supply chain, logistics, finance and accounting, you just saw silos. And so to this day, some of the customers that were some of the earliest pioneers that I had the privilege of working with still express sort of a consternation and their struggle to scale more. Now, to answer your question of what I think a resolution is, and I talk about this in my second LinkedIn course, is a really coherent and supported top-down mandate. I think there's a lot of bottom-up enthusiasm, which is critical for this to really take root, but without top-down mandates from executives, leadership, who both pick the destination, your old classic moonshot statement, and then fund it, then actually invest appropriately in the achievement of that destination. Without those two things, you've got what will become chaos, unfunded chaos. So top-down mandates are absolutely critical. The more we can do to educate executive suites on the imperative of this transformation, and then the imperative that they back it with clear clear moonshot statements and clear investment in their people and the development of the skills, in the right tools and the partnerships that they need. Without that, this goes very slowly or nowhere. Thank you for the question.
No, thanks, Ian. And maybe, David, there's a question here in the chat box that I think it speaks to what you earlier mentioned a little bit and urged about the campaign of thinking big. Our guest is inquiring, can you simplify this? Can you explain this? What do you mean by thinking big in scaling?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dornan. So in my mind, thinking big is really about finding your ultimate mission. Like our ultimate mission when I did the DTV transition was changing every analog set to a digital set and to make that uniform across the country. And again, it affected 30 million families, 60 million TVs. But you got to make it super big so you're always reaching towards it. I know we're going to be having more webinars. One we're going to announce at the end of today on the state of Virginia, looking at RPA and automation and ML and AI across the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I happen to live, which I'm very excited about. But I think we're still in the phase of looking, as Ian said, at silos, and we have to figure out how we make the goals even bigger. Like one of the goals of our center, our initiative, is to get RPA in every public sector operation. Every state, federal, state, and local government and agency and department utilizing RPA to the maximum of their ability, not only to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of those government entities, but also to relieve people of mundane tasks that they're doing now and allow them to have higher value in their jobs, making sure the programs really work, checking out in the field. For example, if we've got a program that we're helping feed hungry children, that they're actually being fed and we're doing it in the best places and we're doing it in the most efficient way that numbers alone can't tell us. So it's really picking the topic and thinking through ultimately where we want to be. The moonshot example, that would be a big idea. Maybe it's we want to land Americans on Mars at some point. That's a big idea. It allows us just to keep moving forward, and the energy behind the big idea propels us to where we want to end up.
I love that.
Yeah. Thank you. So Ian, maybe going back to you, and we spoke a little bit about earlier referring to the whole digitalization trend that's going on globally. Mm-hmm. How do you see the intelligent automation, the RPA, impacting work and the future of work?
Well, I hope what it enables is a sense of ownership and agency in the people doing the work. I hope it gives people the sense that they can have a positive impact on the roles that they play. That's an exciting sort of underpinning and component of the RPA and intelligent automation narrative, really. And you see it being picked up more and more now in a phrase that really has taken off recently, at least to me, which is the concept of the citizen. And citizen whatever, but citizen developer, citizen analyst, citizen data scientist. And that really does speak to, I think, people wanting to play a bigger role and have a positive impact, both on the scope of work that they are assigned, and then the broader sort of environment in which that work exists. So I think that's going to be key, and enterprises need to invest in developing that skill. And actually, to Jennifer Rhodes's question in the Q&A section, that's also going to give people a sense of peace in what these tools are there to do and what they can do, because I think the Hollywood narrative of everything can be automated is just patently untrue. And at least for the next few, frankly, I mean, years, but probably much longer than that. It's an augmentation story, not a replacement story. It is a story of enabling people to be truly great at what they're truly great at. And as David referenced, I mean, it's about picking initiatives that matter most to the community. It's about bringing empathy and creativity to those efforts, and being liberated from a lot of the mundanity. Like, that was always the message, right? It's just taking the robot out of the human was a phrase that a professor, Leslie Wilcox from London School of Economics, coined years ago. And it's a great saying. You do a lot of mundane transactional stuff and you feel like a robot in a lot of your jobs, especially large contracted teams, ones that you often see in public sector. There's just a lot of repetition because there's a lot of scale, but you can do so much more with those people who fundamentally understand the process, totally get the purpose of what the sort of the achieved outcome should and can be, and they're just being enabled to play a role in being their own sort of transformation sort of agents, those citizens we talked about, and hopefully enjoy the work that they're doing more, because there's plenty of work to go around. I mean, look at the economy as it is today. I mean, there's so many jobs at every level that are unstaffed, whether it be in the service sector or in the coding and developing sector. We just don't have enough people. So
that's exactly right. So based on this, what kind of jobs do you expect to be available in the marketplace, or any principles to be successful that we should keep in mind, and our student audience should keep in mind?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and a very pertinent one to the audience. I think, first of all, growing up today, the concept of native, I always loved native, digital native, but being natively used to what these capabilities can do. I mean, talking to Siri or Alexa or Cortana or any of those, you kind of already get some of the gist of how to interact with machines, because you curate the way you ask a question, right? You structure the way that you pose that query to a machine because you know it's a machine. So we are naturally being sort of evolved and trained to be collaborative with technology, but having higher levels of comfort with that sort of logic structure, having higher levels of comfort with data in general. I mean, data is really the story here in so many levels, is imperative to really playing a part in finding opportunities in this new world of work, being a worker of the future and the future of work, as I like to say somewhat too quickly. And so if you can get comfortable with, I mean, hell, take a coding course, not to ever write a line of code, but to understand just the logic behind it, understand data and analytics and the value of that, because that's so important, and or just understand service better, understand what people truly want, because I spent a lot of time talking about customer service, and strangely, it just seems to still stink really badly and almost so many different places. And so there will always be a calling to leverage the tools we've got, leverage that data, but be empathetic to the end customer, whoever they might be, citizen, patient, et cetera, to better design experiences and products. So those are the sorts of skills that I think I would at least make sure I was minoring in as you follow your passion in school and then off into the real world.
Right. Oh, thank you. And I would add to your definition of service, a very good book that I believe it could serve everybody well in terms of improving our service skills. It's written by a restaurateur. His name is Danny Meyer, and the book's name is called "Setting the Table: The Transformational Power of Hospitality in Business." I think we should all do a little refreshing and read that book if you haven't, and get some very good principles out of that in terms of how you can improve your service towards your customer.
Yeah, good point, Dorian. So I would say, in addition to taking a coding class, being open, focusing on some LinkedIn courses like Ian has taught and is teaching now,
Thank you for the
there are a
plug.
lot of different jobs in automation, which we don't really think about. Like even when you are targeting one part of a process, thinking through the logistics of that process. Step one, we enter the information. What happens then? So you're going to need people who are trained to think logically and rationally. And everyone's really has that innate spirit to do that well. It just has to be sometimes revved up in them so they're thinking about things in a very logical way. It's like mathematics. You only can solve problems in a certain way.
Right.
But once you solve the problem, you go, yeah, I know how to do that. And you can solve 50 problems, which goes back to your question with Jim earlier and Rebecca on scaling as well. The more people we get to do that, the more we have the chance to expand and scale.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, again, it's back to having the agency and the lens through which to look at the world you're operating in and understand that things can be done differently and better. And yes, it's design thinking, but it's design thinking knowing what tools you have in your toolkit to then build that end result of your thinking. And to be able to do that en masse, it would be so tremendously powerful. And so I think that
Right.
really is what these waves are doing, is waking people up to realize that they genuinely can have a positive impact on the sort of the routines that they face every day, and the processes that nobody knows better than them. Frankly, that was one of my favorite parts of being a consultant, was sitting side by side in the early days, before I got smarter people to do that for us. But side by side with agents in all walks of every industry, every type of service, and just understand from them what they do every day, why they do it, and what struggles they face, and what they all, I mean, every one of them had 1,000 different ideas and suggestions on how to do something better. Right? And this just gives them the ability to sort of apply their own ingenuity and their own lens on what could be better, to truly
Right.
actually make it better.
Right. So, Ian, what certain countries or industries or types of businesses are leading the charge in adoption, and what could we learn from them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the industries that tend to be better financed. You see, the financial services industry was an early adopter of a lot of this transformation, oftentimes driven by different parameters than other industries. So it was around compliance and security and control, just because they're so heavily regulated. And you saw that in healthcare as well. And in fact, actually, some industries that were so compliance oriented, they were constrained from tapping into that earlier wave of innovation, the arbitrage that I mentioned before. So they don't have large teams offshore doing the work, which meant they had large teams onshore, which meant those large teams were more expensive, and therefore the equation worked in their favor, to be able to invest in some of these programs earlier. So I guess all that to say, there were a few industries that, like the ones I mentioned, healthcare, financial services, insurance, that were earlier on in investing, investing in these waves. But you saw every sort of industry. Country-wise, some of the earliest concepts came out of the UK. So you saw a lot of early adoption in UK and in Western Europe. But then it crossed the pond, came to the States, really caught fire here, and then by extension, sort of spread to all the different places where the teams actually sat. So you see the massive uptake of this in India. You see some really inspired investment and deployment of this across Latin America now. I just came back from a conference in Italy a few weeks ago, and in Italy, Italy felt like it was a little behind, and enough people told me that I have to believe them now. So I guess certain regions are not sort of haven't advanced as quickly. But the nice thing is, this is two different things. One, you can leapfrog and learn from those who've gone before you, so you can actually accelerate your pace and catch up to them, or even surpass them. And also, this isn't a heavy infrastructure play, right? This isn't like you're 10 years behind building bridges because it takes so long to build a bridge. The speed at which you can upskill and start to pilot and understand the art of the possible here is very quick. So I imagine very soon everyone will be sort of sprinting towards the future.
Ian, how about we turn it? No, I would like to suggest maybe we turn it to the audience now, since we're in the last 5 minutes of our time. And a couple of great questions here, and perhaps Ian and us also, we can contribute, of course. But here's one that I found it very interesting. Ian, what do you suggest for organization to start RPA consulting? What is the sweet spot to be a startup in consulting?
Okay, so that's a question for somebody who wants to start their own RPA or intelligent automation consultancy. What's the sweet spot to be a startup in consulting? It's interesting. The market in the world has changed a lot from 2014 when we started Symphony. It is much more crowded. There are a lot of folks, a lot of smart folks who are working in this space and aspire to play roles. I think the easy, probably too easy answer is subspecialize. If you're coming from a particular industry, stick to the industry because it's far more important that you understand the processes and in the scope of the industry, just all the logistics and the rationale behind what they do, and then apply the technology. It's harder to just learn the technology as a vanilla and then go try to learn insurance, for instance. So I would say, if you were starting now, start as a very specialized industry pure play. And I think the small and medium business sector, so not chase the whales necessarily, because either A, they've invested in developing their own capabilities in-house, so they won't spend as much money on third parties, and or smaller organizations just haven't come to these same discussions quite as quickly. So now they are. So focus on your vertical niche and small and medium business if possible, or regional too. I mean, that's another sort of nicheifying discussion to have. Is there a particular country or community that you're part of where you know the players, the companies that might adopt your technologies, and start there.
Oh, wow. These are great insights. Yeah, thank you. Here's one more. And I think this one alluded a little bit to it, but there's lots of unknowns here. And I think it's one of the main challenges. So can you share more in terms of a change in mindset that government workers need to take when they hear RPA and the bots are coming? What would you advise agencies and the contractors implementing these tools to do to reduce the fear of RPA and move closer to easier adoption?
Yeah, I mean, the more you know, the less you fear. So it's an education play. It's giving people the ability to understand just the capabilities today, and also understand that none of these initiatives happen without their creativity and ingenuity and insight. They're the ones who know the processes, and so they're the ones who will collaborate and train the robots, but not. Again, I so rarely saw robots sort of take teams out, frankly, that they always supplemented and improved. For the most part, you feel this in whatever role you play. You feel like the company or the organization or the government division can be doing more. You know that you have to do more, but you've struggled to do that more because your bandwidth constrained. And so robots, the application of software automation to augment your people makes your people more efficient, makes you able to better deliver the services that you're contracted to deliver and better enjoy the work that you're doing. So I don't think it's something that should be feared, but I do think it should be something that is understood. And by understanding it, you'll see the art of the possible rather than the sort of the fear mongering that is so prevalent. So.
Yeah, Doran, I just might quickly add, I think you have to timeline it to bring people in who've experienced RPA in other agencies to tell authentic stories, bring people in who thought they were going to lose their jobs, and then say, you know what? This really turned out positive for me because I could focus on higher value items, and then kind of make sure that along the way, people understand each step so they don't think like there's some mass conspiracy going on to want to get rid of them. And then you can even, as an economist, you can even say, depending on what the constraints are by government, if we're able to save through this process, we're able to increase everyone's salary 1% or 5%, or incentivize them, give out bonuses for people who are engaged, because nothing still rings true like financial incentives. As an economist, I would say that, of course.
I think labor negotiators just woke up and
right
by your suggestions right there. But no, I agree with everything you said. I mean, it really is putting it in terms that matter most to them.
Now we're out of time. This has been great. First, thanks, Ian. You've been terrific.
Thank you.
And thanks, Doran. You've been great as well. And I want to mention that you have the great learning resources, a vlog on YouTube and on LinkedIn. How does someone subscribe to that?
That is a great question. Here, let me pull that up right now. If anyone wants to subscribe, I'd be absolutely honored.
Maybe you could put that in the chat box.
Yeah.
And then I want to also add that we appreciate you all being with us. We at the RPA initiative at George Mason continually do a series of these webinars to educate people on the benefits of technology. And our next one is going to be, I hope you're going to be with us on November 2nd for a look at what the Commonwealth of Virginia is doing as RPA as a service and the state's digital transformation leadership. It's really the first state in the country that's doing this. I'm particularly proud because I'm a Virginian, but I think you'll find it interesting. And we're having the COO of the Virginia Information Technologies Agencies coming really to share their experience and their wisdom with us so we can replicate this around the country. And with that, I want to thank you all for being with us today and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Ian, for being here.
Yeah.